All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome into my instant college football reaction here. I'm going to quickly go through all the games from yesterday, week number 6. All right, guys, welcome into my instant reaction here for college football week number 6. I'm going to go through all the ranked games. Then we're going to take a look at the analytics, what happened yesterday. There's some interesting storylines developing. We might have an utter mess when it comes to the 4-team playoff because of the situation right now in the Big 12. And we're going to begin with Georgia destroying Kentucky, guys. Finally, this was kind of expected, but it was like Georgia was sitting 0-5 against the spread. When were they going to cover? The Carson Beck breakout game. 300 yards in the first half alone. And this is an annihilation by Georgia. I'm sure they're going to stay at number 1 now. Although, early in this year, they haven't been very good. I still don't think they're anything, like super crazy. But Kentucky, they never should have been ranked in the first place. It is what it is. They started off 5-0. Their first 3 wins were completely horrible non-conference opponents. Then they beat a Florida team who was overrated in and of themselves. Remember, Florida versus Kentucky, the battle of the overrateds. Kentucky ends up winning. It's just going to make them even more overrated, and then Georgia crushes them. We liked Georgia minus 15. It gets bet down to minus 14. We like them even more, and they end up covering. Michigan destroys Minnesota, so they also cover. Michigan now with Jim Harbaugh back, they're starting to become a covers machine. They win this game 52-10. Minnesota just has no offense. It is what it is. Michigan gets a pick 6 right out of the gate. That game is completely over. These two teams, it was a mismatch. That's really all I can say about Michigan and Minnesota. Minnesota, to me, they might go 4-8 this year. They're just horrible on offense. Next, you do have the huge game of the day. Oklahoma, Texas. Oklahoma ends up winning. Trust the analytics, at least when it comes to this game. Oklahoma, the models loved them, but Vegas liked Texas. Think about this. Texas was minus 6, but the FPI and all of them said Oklahoma should be the favorites. I liked Oklahoma plus 5.5. I had them losing by 3, and they end up winning outright. And they really did control this game, although probably one of the weirder QB games I've seen this year from Quinn Ewers, who started 3 of 6 for 7 yards and 2 interceptions and finished with just 4 incompletions, I believe on 35 pass attempts. So just a very strange game. The start of the game was completely crazy. Oklahoma controlled it throughout. Texas ends up getting the late field goal, but they left too much time on the clock. Unfortunately, that's always what happens when it comes to college football. The late drives, the clock stopping on first down. Oklahoma, Dylan Gabriel get it done. And guys, this is a big issue because the Big 12 this year outside of these two teams is horrible. I would expect Texas to win out, go into the Big 12 championship game against Oklahoma. Oklahoma's going to be very likely undefeated. They're going to win every game because they're going to be double-digit favorites. Imagine if Texas beats Oklahoma in a rematch in the Big 12 championship game. Do both of them make the playoff from a bad Big 12 this year? I think probably. And then what happens to the Big 10 with Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State? What happens to the Pac-12? Do they cannibalize themselves? There's going to be some issues here if Oklahoma and Texas both make the playoffs. If Texas ends up beating Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship rematch and they both have 1 loss, it's going to be a complete mess. So Oklahoma and Texas both make the playoff possibly, and then the Big 10 is what happens if Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State all finish with 1 loss? I guess we'll see if it ends up happening, but it is a crazy idea. Ohio State beats Maryland by 20. The Buckeyes have a really, really bad offensive line, and it's disturbing considering Ohio State's offensive line coach, the highest paid offensive line coach in college football. They cannot run block. Ohio State needs to go to some type of spread offense where they only run when the numbers favor it. There's no power O with this Buckeyes team. They cannot convert 3rd and short or 4th and short. And I think they're really going to struggle against the Penn State and a Michigan because they cannot run the football. And Kyle McCord is a very streaky passer. He will make a really good throw every now and then, but for Kyle McCord to really succeed, he would need a very strong run game and a great offensive line, and I think he could be very good. The problem is he has neither of those things. So, you see some of these passes from McCord, like the Marvin Harrison Jr. one. Marvin Harrison Jr. is beating his guy by 20 20 yards, he has to wait for the ball. Same thing with Julian Fleming. The throws are just way behind. So Ohio State ends up beating Maryland. The Buckeyes defense continues to play very well as a unit, allowing 0 big plays. Maryland, I know the narrative is going to be, oh, they should be ranked now because they hung in there. I don't think Maryland's very good. I mean, Ohio State, Maryland's secondary is bad. Like, there were several times during that game where you saw Marvin Harrison Jr. 20 yards wide open, Julian Fleming. To me, we'll see what happens with Maryland. They are 5-1, but, I think the narrative is more Ohio State this year is just not as good as we're used to, rather than, oh, now Maryland's this really good team this year because they hung in there with Ohio State. The Buckeyes do end up covering the spread, mainly because of that fourth quarter, 17-0. They were down 10-0. Maryland threw a pick six. You cannot do that. The Buckeyes end up winning. Next, you've got Florida State in a very wacky game, winning 39-17. They don't cover the 24-point spread. 22-0 lead at the end of the first quarter. Very strange. I don't know what to make of this Florida State team, but you have to give them credit. They are undefeated right now. USC, we got to stop it. They end up beating Arizona at like 3 a.m. in triple overtime, 43-41. Caleb Williams only one passing touchdown. USC, there's no way. There's no way they make the playoff. They've got too bad of a defense. They started off losing this game 17-0. Of course, they end up coming back, and then they and then they end up winning against Zona in triple overtime. So USC's probably going to move maybe down one spot, although they are still undefeated. Louisville beats Notre Dame. This is Louisville's breakout game, guys. Louisville plus 6.5 was an auto lock, and they're going to be a top 15 team. And we looked at Louisville's schedule. Oh my goodness. Louisville, I mean, I'm not going to say they're going undefeated. They have a very favorable schedule. They have a schedule where you could see them winning out. We'll see what happens. Could be a breakout year for Louisville football. And Notre Dame now with 2 losses, they're probably going to drop back to number 18 or number 19. They simply do not have enough explosive offensive talent. They can't generate enough big plays. They're in these lower scoring games. I mean, they very easily could have lost to Duke last week. They could easily right now be 4-3. They've had a very tough schedule. I agree. They're not a horrible team, or they're a good team, but the problem is there's just the lack of explosive players on offense for Notre Dame, the inability to generate big plays. Next, you've got Bama beating Texas A&M. We loved Bama minus the 2.5. Bama minus the 2.5. Nick Saban against Max Johnson. They get it done. It was a relatively close game, but I do think this was a game where Alabama was in control the majority of it. Jalen Milroe really settling in. Bama looks like a top 10 team to me. I like what I'm seeing. That's a good road win at A&M in a tough environment. Bama gets it done and they cover. UCLA ends up beating Washington State by 8. This game honestly should have been a complete blowout. Guys, go look up this game. In terms of total yards, I think UCLA outgained them by 300 total yards. Dante Moore threw a red zone interception that ended up being a pick six, which really swung it. But UCLA, they still cover the 3.5. Washington State falling back to the pack a little bit. North Carolina crushes Syracuse. It's a tough one for me for sure. That's a blowout win for North Carolina. Oregon State beats California. What a high-scoring mess this was at night. Holy crap. 52-40 for Oregon State. That's not great for their... Yeah, Oregon State has a terrible defense, man. Think about Oregon State. Didn't Oregon State give up, like, a crazy amount of points to Washington State as well? But listen, they get the win. You got to give them credit. 52-40. Ole Miss beats Arkansas, but Arkansas ends up covering. I guess, okay win for Ole Miss. I'm not that high on Ole Miss. They're 5-1, but Arkansas, they were sitting plus 11. They end up covering. Georgia Tech beats Miami, man. Classic Miami loss. Just crazy. Georgia Tech loses to Bowling Green. Last week, they come back and win on the road as 20-point underdogs. My goodness. LSU beats Missouri. LSU minus the 6.5. Never in doubt. Never in doubt. The fourth quarter, 22-7. Yeah, neither of these two teams can play defense. LSU especially just cannot play defense. I think LSU's probably going 8-4 this year. I predicted them to be down. Missouri, could you imagine if Missouri would have won this game? We would not hear the end of it. They would be ranked inside the top 15. The hype for the SEC team would be crazy. And then how about this? My upset special, Wyoming sitting plus 6.5. They win outright. Will Wyoming be ranked? What a win. They're 5-1. Their only loss is at Texas in a game they were competitive in. Fresno State, unfortunately, they're going to be unranked for sure after the loss to Wyoming. And then taking a look at the FPI update, so you still do have Ohio State sitting at number 1. The context to this is Ohio State beat a Maryland team that was like fringe top 25 by 20 points. So, I mean, yeah, they're going to stay at number 1. Oklahoma sitting at number 2. Certainly the huge win over Texas. Bama still at number 3. Obviously, you know, that's a tough ranking there. This is the FPI, though. It's based on team talent partly. You have Georgia at number 4, up 3 spots. Not surprised at all. Georgia with a dominant home win. You have Oregon coming off a bye. They moved up 1 spot. Texas down 2 spots. They're at number 6. That's a good ranking for them. Penn State trending down. Even though they had a bye, they're at number 7. Michigan trending up. They're at number 8 right now. Washington still at number 9. FSU at number 10. Ole Miss up 2 spots. I would have Ole Miss a lot lower than that. They have a bad defense. Notre Dame down 1 spot. Certainly in the AP poll, they're going to be lower. USC moves down. How about USC down below a 2-loss Notre Dame team? But it makes sense because they've got a terrible defense. LSU at number 14. Obviously, I would have them a little bit lower. They just have too bad of a defense. A&M sitting at number 15. I mean, A&M's a competitive team. You know, it's a tough loss to Alabama. You have North Carolina trending up 5 spots after the destroying of Syracuse. You have Tennessee up 1 spot. Clemson down 1 spot. They barely beat Wake Forest. Miami moves down 4 spots. Certainly, they're not going to be ranked after the loss to Georgia Tech. You do have Oregon State sitting at number 20. Louisville trending up to number 21. They're probably going to be inside of the top 13 in the AP poll, or at least close. Kansas State should be out of the top 40, folks. I mean, Kansas State lost to Oklahoma State on Friday night. Wisconsin, slowly but surely, this Wisconsin team is lurking. And I can already see the setup for Wisconsin. They're going to have a home game at night against Ohio State. This is an unstable Ohio State team that cannot win on the line of scrimmage. I am very worried for the Ohio State Buckeyes when they go to Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin is going to keep winning. They're going to be ranked inside the top 20. And this Ohio State has Penn State and then at Wisconsin. This is setting up to be a big issue for the Buckeyes. I think that's going to be a good game for Wisconsin, possibly to get an upset with the home environment, facing a team that really struggles to run the ball. Maryland up 1 spot. That's good for Ohio State sitting at number 24. Duke at number 25. We'll have to see how healthy Riley Leonard is coming off the bye. He's not going to play this next week. Utah at number 26 coming off a bye. Texas Tech, better than their record. Yes, Texas Tech is actually good. Think about this. 2 of Texas Tech's losses. One of them was to Wyoming on the road, who's a good team. One of them was a game they should have won against Oregon, who's top 10. Texas Tech is a fringe top 25 team. I agree. They're good. Syracuse has got to go after that loss. How about Auburn getting a shout out? And then UCLA. I do like UCLA as well, but that is the top 30 there in terms of the FPI. But guys, the big story I'm watching right now, this mess with the Big 12. We're expecting both Texas and Oklahoma to win out, so Texas is going to have 1 loss and still a really good resume because they beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa, and Oklahoma is going to be undefeated going into the Big 12 championship. Texas beats Oklahoma in the rematch. Let's just say both of those teams, do they guaranteed make the playoff? How does that impact the SEC? How does that impact the Big 10? What a mess. Could only one team, probably only one team from the Big Ten. I mean, I guess we'll see what happens between the round robin, Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan. You know, do they all split those games? How does that end up working out? The SEC, it seems like it's Georgia or bust right now. Bama is kind of lurking, but they already have 1 loss. They have no room for error. it'll be interesting. And also, Bama has a tough schedule. I do think Bama's probably going to lose again before the end of the regular season. But either way, you have that situation. And then the ACC, you have FSU sitting undefeated. You have Louisville sitting undefeated with a very easier remaining schedule. Could those teams both be undefeated, towards the end of the season? That's something we're watching as well. The Pac-12 is a complete mess at the top. There's huge games coming up. Teams are going to start losing because you have the huge Oregon-Washington game next week with College Game Day. We will see. Either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.